There are very few indie games that have commanded the kind of attention Silksong has. Ever since Team Cherry first announced it back in 2019, the game has sat in a strange limbo, whispers, tiny trailers, and then years of near silence. 6 years of waiting, of speculation, of people wondering if the game had secretly been cancelled or if it would actually ever come out. And now, at long last, Team Cherry has finally dropped it. The launch was nothing short of explosive. Within hours, the game hit over 580,000 concurrent players on Steam alone, breaking records for an indie release and putting it firmly in the spotlight as one of 2025's biggest games. But of course, hype and launch numbers only tell part of the story. The real question is, does the game itself actually live up to the massive expectations placed on it? After 30 hours, rolling the credits, and diving into the extensive post-game, I'd say yes. But it's not going to be a game for everyone. Let's break down what Team Cherry absolutely nailed, where the game stumbles a bit, and whether this fantastic Metroidvania is one for you. Let's start with what Silksong does best. The first thing that hit me about Silksong is just how good it feels to play. Movement is silky smooth, pun intended, and Hornet's combat options strike a perfect balance between familiar and fresh. If you played Hollow Knight, you'll recognize the DNA immediately, but Hornet's weightier jumps, tighter physics, and sharper animations make her feel like a completely different character rather than just a reskin of the Knight. One of the things I noticed is that Hornet has more deliberate momentum. She isn't as floaty as the Knight was, and that gives her attacks and movement a more grounded, almost athletic quality. It ties directly into the new ledge climbing system. Being able to grab ledges, vault over them, and chain those movements together feels amazing. It's subtle, but it opens up a ton of new possibilities for how you navigate areas and approach fights. Even Hornet's default down attack has been reworked. Instead of the Knight's pogo slash, Hornet uses a down stab that's harder to abuse for infinite bounces. At first this feels like an awkward downgrade, but it quickly becomes clear that the design forces you to rethink movement and combat flow in an interesting way. Later on though, the crest system allows you to customize and expand her moveset, so what initially feels like a limitation ends up creating space for meaningful progression. Like the first Hollow Knight, combat is inseparable from platforming. Encounters are never just about whacking enemies until they fall over, they're about spacing, precision, and using the environment to your advantage. You're bouncing off enemies, chaining dashes, and squeezing in attacks in mid-air while dodging spikes and projectiles. It's like Mega Man's jump and shoot design ethos, but here it's jump and slash. It works beautifully in Hollow Knight, and it works beautifully again in Silksong. But above all else, what I love about the tight mechanics is the sense of complete control that you have over Hornet. Every time I died, I never felt like the game cheated me. It was always clear that I could have dodged sooner, or read the enemy better, or used my tools more effectively. Victories felt hard-earned, failures felt like lessons, and that constant cycle of improvement is incredibly addictive. All of these great mechanics are then paired with some of the greatest enemy variety I've ever seen in a game. It is astonishing how many different bad guys Team Cherry has crammed in here. Even 30 hours in and new enemy varieties keep on coming. They do a great job at testing your abilities in different ways, and when paired with environmental hazards, create so many different combat situations that keep gameplay fresh. There are some that are way too tanky and awkward to hit, but the complete roster of enemies is nothing short of impressive. But of course, in a game like this, the real test of mechanics lies in the bosses. And wow, Team Cherry went all out. The sheer diversity of different fights is staggering. You've got intimate duels with humanoid opponents that feel almost like dance battles, and then you've got colossal monsters that fill the entire screen and demand constant movement. Some fights are lightning fast, while others are more methodical. The game almost never repeats itself, and when it does, it throws in new twists to keep the fights fresh. The biggest strength of these bosses is the telegraphing. Every attack has a very clear tell. The first time you fight a boss, you'll probably get wrecked, but nothing feels cheap. Over time, you start reading those signals and reacting instinctively, and that gradual mastery is intoxicating. It scratches the exact same itch as a Souls game, that loop of failure, learning, and eventual triumph. That being said, not every boss is perfect. There are definitely a couple of fights that feel like missteps, like this awful gauntlet in Act 2. But the most egregious one is actually so terrible. It forces you to run back through a poison swamp full of randomized enemy spawns before you even reach the boss. Then you fight a gauntlet of enemies over poison, and then finally facing the boss itself. Dying means doing all this over again, which is infuriating. If there at least had been a bench near the arena, it would have been much more palatable, but with the run back, the poison, and the random enemies, it really wasn't fun and should be reworked. Still, those low points are rare. For the most part, the boss lineup is consistently strong, and it's clear that Team Cherry poured a huge amount of effort into making these encounters memorable. But what really holds the Metroidvania together isn't just the combat, it's the exploration. and Silksong absolutely delivers. The world is big, like really, really, really big. In fact, the map at times feels too large to the point of being overwhelming, but what makes it all work is how densely packed it is with secrets and shortcuts. Everywhere you go, there are hidden passages, optional rooms, and entire areas that you can miss if you're not paying attention. The amount of content the team has crammed here is staggering. That said, the game doesn't hold your hand at all in going through all of this content. You're given a general sense of direction, but how you actually get there is completely up to you. It's entirely possible to stumble into a high level area and get obliterated by enemies you're not ready for. For some players, that lack of guidance will be frustrating, but for me, it made the discoveries feel genuine. When you finally push through an area that felt impossible before, you know it's because you got better, not because the game decided it was time to let you through. Another thing I loved is how navigation itself becomes a skill. As I played, I started piecing together how areas are connected, optimizing routes, and shaving down backtracking time. It made me feel like I was mastering the world itself and not just the combat. In a landscape full of games that hold your hand excessively, the complete sense of freedom and ownership over your gameplay decisions were a breath of fresh air. Coupled with the exploration is the character progression. Silksong is after all a classic Metroidvania and exceeds at making you feel gradually more and more powerful. Most of the new abilities expand your mobility, air dashes, double jumps, wall climbing, and so on. As they were in the first game, these aren't just power-ups, they fundamentally change how you interact with the map. Areas that felt unreachable suddenly become accessible, and your movement becomes more fluid and expressive. I love how so many moves feel multi-purposed, useful in both traversal and combat in different ways. Then there are the tools, which replace charms from the original game. Tools come in both active and passive forms. Some give you new combat options, while others provide buffs or utility. The beauty of this system is how flexible it is. You can build Hornet to suit your playstyle or tailor your setup for specific bosses. It encourages experimentation and rewards exploration since many tools are hidden off the beaten path. This system also makes the game more approachable. Hardcore players can brute force their way through fights with raw skill, but tools give everyone a way to tip the odds in their favor. It's yet another great way to connect the exploration to the combat, and it works great. But for as great as the game is, it does have its speed bumps. Let's talk about where the game stumbles and where some players may bounce off of it a bit. If you read the online discourse, you know that the biggest point of contention is the difficulty. Don't get me wrong, Silksong is supposed to be hard. That's clearly part of the appeal. But there are legitimate moments where the difficulty crosses the line from challenging to frustrating. Most notably, a lot of enemies and hazards deal 2 points of damage instead of 1, which evaporates your health bar in the early game. You start with 5 hit points, but in practice you die in around 3 hits. Why this sucks is because it's important in these kind of games for the player to interact with the combat long enough to really nail down enemy attack patterns. But when you're dying that fast, it can feel like you're being punished before you even have a chance to understand the fight. Even bumping into enemies can chunk for 2 HP, and while I get this is meant to balance Hornet's stronger healing, it still feels awful and not very balanced. Luckily, it seems that Team Cherry has taken note, already planning to nerf a couple of the early game bosses in an upcoming patch. Personally, I still think they could do more in scaling back some of the hits to do 1 damage, which would go a long way in making the game way more accessible without compromising the integrity of the fights. Second, my next complaint about the game is the economy. As I mentioned in my first impressions, there are so many things that require rosaries, the currency of the game. Tools from shops, but most criminally, key bench checkpoints throughout the map cost upwards of 80 rosaries. It sucks when you make great progress through a map, finally find a checkpoint, only to realize you're short on cash to rest on the bench. You then die and have to farm all that currency and run all the way back to where you were. It can feel awful and hurts what is otherwise great pacing. There's also just a huge need for rosaries to progress in general. I found myself needing to farm quite a bit of currency consistently throughout my playthrough, so if a bit of grinding isn't your thing, you might bounce off in this regard. Thankfully, just like the difficulty, Team Cherry is aware of this and are planning some changes. Finally, my last issue is with how the game handles its so-called optional content. Spoiler warning here because this touches on the late game. Ready? Okay. So Silksong actually has a hidden Act 3, a huge important part of the game's story and world. But accessing it requires completing an absurd number of side quests, collectible hunts, and other requirements. Some of these are tedious on their own, but what really pushes it over the edge is how vague the game is about what you actually need to do. I get what Team Cherry was going for. Creating this collective mystery for the community to solve together is exciting and fresh for the internet age. But when you lock a massive portion of the game behind requirements that are both grindy and unclear, it's hard not to feel at least a little bit salty for more casual players trying to figure out everything on their own. For completionists, this might all sound wonderful, but for me, it added around 10 extra hours of checklist gameplay that felt more like homework than discovery, because I would never realistically figure this out on my own with how unclear the requirements are. It's undoubtedly a really cool moment accessing Act 3, but my excitement was definitely brought down a notch by needing external help, which I can see many players requiring. The solution doesn't have to be obvious, but a few more in-game clues to point players in at least some direction would have made this so much more enjoyable. At the end of the day though, these issues don't change the fact that Silksong is an incredible achievement. It's bigger, tougher, and way more ambitious than the original Hollow Knight, and it somehow manages to justify 6 years of waiting. For only $20, the amount of value here is insane. You're getting dozens if not hundreds of hours of expertly crafted content with some of the best mechanics and level design in the genre. Yes, it's punishing. Yes, it will frustrate you. But if you're the kind of player who enjoys mastery, exploration, and a real sense of accomplishment, Silksong is absolutely a game for you. Team Cherry has once again proven that they're in the top echelon of devs, with Silksong easily a contender for Game of the Year 2025 alongside Expedition 33.